I'm the one with the badge and the gun, so you're going to do exactly what I say. This statement, delivered with the unshakable confidence of a man who believed his authority was absolute, would be memorialized as Exhibit A in the catastrophic career collapse of Chicago police officer Kyle Jensen. The official record designates the event as Incident 77B4, a 7-minute and 12-second interaction that occurred on a deceptively placid April afternoon in the city's affluent Metropolitan Lakeshore Park. The encounter, initiated by Officer Jensen against Dr. Marcus Thorne, a citizen in civilian attire, was not a matter of subjective interpretation. It was a forensically documented case study in the destructive power of unchecked prejudice. Every moment was captured with cold digital precision by Officer Jensen's own body-worn camera, 3 separate park security cameras, and a discrete audio recording activated by Dr. Thorne. The collected evidence would prove irrefutably that the officer's actions were devoid of reasonable suspicion and rooted entirely in racial bias. Every moment was captured with cold digital precision by Officer Jensen's own body-worn camera, 3 separate park security cameras, and a discrete audio recording activated by Dr. Thorne. The collected evidence would prove irrefutably that the officer's actions were devoid of reasonable suspicion and rooted entirely in racial bias. What Jensen could not possibly comprehend was that his target was not a loiterer, but a special agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, a man whose professional life was dedicated to the study of threat assessment and human behavior. This single, profound misjudgment would trigger a chain reaction of consequences so severe and so swift that they would be quantified down to the last cent. The fallout included Officer Jensen's immediate and dishonorable termination from the force, the forfeiture of a pension valued at over $2.5 million, and a civil rights lawsuit settlement that would saddle him with a personal debt to the city exceeding $1 million. The total, documented financial ruination stemming from those 7 minutes was calculated at a staggering $3,625,800. What follows is a chronological analysis of the events that led a 12-year veteran of the police force to systematically dismantle his own life, all because he saw a man who, in his eyes, simply did not belong. The narrative begins 32 minutes before the confrontation, with the sun casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of the park. The air carried the fresh, cool scent of Lake Michigan, mingling with the distant rhythmic hum of city traffic. Dr. Marcus Thorne was, for all intents and purposes, invisible. Dressed in nondescript gray athletic shorts, a dark moisture-wicking shirt, and running shoes, he blended seamlessly into the urban tapestry. He could have been a fitness enthusiast cooling down, a local resident enjoying the weather, or a tourist taking in the sights. This anonymity was deliberate, a critical component of his work. For the past hour, he had been engaged in a routine but mentally taxing field exercise, conducting a passive counter-surveillance and threat analysis of a public space. His movements were minimal but precise. He would stand near a cluster of oak trees for several minutes, his gaze not idle but actively tracking the flow of pedestrians, noting how their paths intersected with the sweeping mechanical gaze of a dome-shaped CCTV camera mounted on a nearby light pole. He mentally mapped its blind spots, the alcoves and architectural features that offered temporary cover. He timed the intervals of a private security guard's patrol route along the waterfront promenade. He observed family dynamics, the way a parent's attention was divided between multiple children, creating predictable moments of vulnerability. This was his craft, the silent, meticulous deconstruction of an environment to understand its weaknesses and patterns. It was a skill set honed over a decade of service in federal law enforcement, protecting dignitaries and investigating threats against national security. There was no menace in his actions, only a deep academic focus. He was a scholar in the field of public safety, and the park was his classroom. It was this very stillness, this quiet intellectual intensity that drew the attention of Officer Kyle Jensen. From the driver's seat of his patrol vehicle parked 100 yards away, Jensen's perception filtered the scene through a lens of ingrained suspicion. His record, a document later scrutinized by Internal Affairs, showed a decorated but troubling history. 12 years of service had hardened his instincts into rigid biases, and his file contained 3 prior civilian complaints of unwarranted stops, each one dismissed due to a lack of definitive evidence. To Jensen, the park was a territory of binaries, safe families and dangerous outliers. He saw the teenagers on skateboards, the couple having a loud argument, the homeless man sleeping on a bench, and dismissed them as known quantities, part of the landscape. But his eye snagged on Dr. Thorne, a black man, physically fit, standing alone, watching. In Jensen's mind, this combination of attributes did not compute as benign. It registered as a threat, an anomaly that required investigation, an itch that needed to be scratched. He watched for 4 minutes, his internal narrative solidifying with each passing second. He wasn't observing a professional at work, he was observing a suspect casing a target. The decision was made. He put the car in park, the click of the gear shift an audible punctuation mark on his fatal error. He opened the door, and the sound of it closing, a solid, authoritative thud, echoed faintly across the grass. He began to walk toward Dr. Thorne, his posture already broadcasting aggression, his hand resting instinctively on the grip of his holstered firearm. He was crossing the 50 yards of open lawn, each step a confirmation of a prejudice that would soon be presented to him as a bill for over $3.5 million. Officer Kyle Jensen closed the final 50 yards with a gait that broadcasted unearned authority, a rigid, purposeful stride designed to intimidate. His hand never strayed far from the holstered weapon on his hip, a piece of body language meticulously analyzed later by use of force experts as a premature and unwarranted display of aggression. The park's ambient sounds, the laughter of children and the rustle of leaves, seemed to recede as he entered Dr. Thorne's personal space, casting a literal and metaphorical shadow. His first words were not an inquiry but an accusation, a verbal jab delivered without preamble. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice a low growl that carried the weight of a foregone conclusion. Dr. Thorne, who had tracked the officer's approach with his peripheral vision, turned his head slowly, his own posture the antithesis of Jensen's. Where Jensen was rigid with tension, Thorne was relaxed, his shoulders down, his hands loosely at his sides. He made no sudden movements, a conscious choice to present himself as a non-threat. His response was measured, his tone neutral. "I'm enjoying the weather, officer, just observing." The simplicity and calmness of the answer seemed to enrage Jensen further, as if it were a form of sophisticated mockery. The body-worn camera footage, which would become the centerpiece of the Internal Affairs investigation, captured the subtle tightening of Jensen's jaw, the slight flare of his nostrils. He saw not a citizen answering a question, but a suspect employing a tactic. "Observing what?" he pressed, taking another half-step forward, a spatial violation intended to assert dominance. "You've been standing in this same spot for 20 minutes, just staring. It's making people uncomfortable." Dr. Thorne's mind, trained to deconstruct threats and de-escalate volatile encounters, immediately cataloged the inconsistencies. He had been in the general area for over 30 minutes, but had moved between 3 distinct observation points. The claim that people were uncomfortable was a classic, baseless fabrication used to manufacture reasonable suspicion where none existed. He decided to counter the lie with a calm, factual query. "Could you specify who has made a complaint, officer? I haven't spoken to anyone." This logical question, designed to force Jensen to confront the falsehood of his own premise, had the opposite effect. It was gasoline on a fire of prejudice. Jensen's eyes narrowed. "I'm the one who gets to ask the questions here. I need to see some identification." The demand was an order, stripped of any professional courtesy, a raw exercise of power from a man who believed his badge made his perception infallible. What would you do if you were in Dr. Thorne's position, facing an officer who refuses to listen to reason? Share your strategy in the comments. Instead of immediately reaching for a wallet he did not have on his person, Dr. Thorne held his ground, his gaze unwavering. His objective was not defiance, but clarification, a critical step in establishing a legal record of the encounter. He was acutely aware that at least 2 CCTV cameras, in addition to Jensen's own body cam, were documenting every word, every gesture. I am not required to provide identification unless you have a reasonable and articulable suspicion that I have committed, am committing, or am about to commit a crime, he stated, his voice remaining level, almost academic. Simply standing in a public park does not meet that legal standard. Officer, I am asking you to articulate the specific crime you suspect me of. This calm recitation of established law was, to Officer Jensen, the ultimate insult. He processed it not as a citizen asserting his rights, but as a criminal challenging his authority. A contemptuous smirk played on his lips. "Listen to this guy," he scoffed, the sound captured with perfect clarity by the microphone on his chest. "A real constitutional scholar in running shorts. Let me spell it out for you. The reasonable suspicion is that a guy like you, in this neighborhood, doesn't just hang around watching families. It doesn't fit. It's predatory behavior." The mask was off. The accusation was no longer about a specific action, but about an identity. It was a direct admission that Jensen's suspicion was based entirely on the fact that Dr. Thorne, a black man, was present in a predominantly white affluent area. The officer's internal narrative had now become his official recorded justification. Dr. Thorne's expression did not change, but his internal calculus shifted. De-escalation was no longer possible. The officer was committed to a path of confrontation. The goal now was simply to let Jensen create as much evidence as possible. "Officer, your statement is predicated on a demographic assumption, not on any observed illegal activity. That is the definition of profiling. I must advise you to cease this unlawful detention." The warning, delivered with the dispassionate tone of a pilot announcing turbulence, was the final trigger for Jensen's complete loss of professional control. "That's it. You're done. Obstruction of a lawful investigation." He reached back and unclipped his handcuffs, the metallic click and auditory punctuation mark on his career-ending decision. He was no longer an officer of the law. He was a man driven by pure, unadulterated bias, and he was about to put his hands on an agent of the federal government. As Officer Jensen advanced, the silver of the handcuffs glinting in the afternoon sun, Dr. Thorne did not retreat. He simply held his ground, a fixed point of calm in Jensen's self-made storm. "Officer," he said, his voice devoid of fear or anger, "I need to advise you one last time. Your actions constitute unlawful detainment and are a violation of my civil rights under color of law. This entire exchange is being recorded by your own camera, as well as park security systems from at least 2 angles. I urge you to cease this course of action before you create irreversible professional and legal consequences for yourself." This was not a plea, but a final, professionally delivered courtesy, a last off-ramp from a highway to ruin. To Jensen, however, it sounded like the desperate bluff of a cornered criminal. He stopped and let out a short, derisive laugh, the sound grating and ugly in the quiet park air. "Let me be clear," he snarled, pointing a finger at Thorne's chest. "I am the one with the badge and the gun, so you are going to do exactly what I say. You have no rights here until I say you do." The statement, a grotesque distortion of legal principle, hung in the air, a perfect self-contained indictment captured with pristine clarity by multiple microphones. The high-definition CCTV camera mounted on a nearby light pole, designed to deter petty crime, was now the primary witness to a career suicide. It zoomed in slightly, its programming tracking the most prominent source of motion, documenting the moment Jensen abandoned reason entirely. He took a step back, his eyes still locked on Thorne,
and unclipped the radio from his shoulder. He was done playing games. He was calling for backup, an act that would transform his prejudiced assumptions into an official, falsified police report. He keyed the microphone, the static-filled click, a sound of absolute finality. "Dispatch, this is 7-2 David," he barked into the receiver. "I have a belligerent male refusing to identify at Lakeshore Park, requesting a second unit for assistance. Subject is a possible flight risk." Every word was a lie, a fabrication designed to retroactively justify his illegal stop. And every word was being logged, time-stamped, and preserved. The dispatcher's calm, professional voice crackled back, acknowledging the request. A backup unit was on its way. With the call for backup complete, a switch flipped inside Officer Kyle Jensen. The tension in his shoulders eased, replaced by a smug, unassailable confidence. In his mind, the encounter was over, the outcome predetermined. He had followed his gut, identified a threat, and was now simply waiting for the procedural machinery to churn his correct assumption into a formal arrest report. He looked at Dr. Thorne not as a person, but as paperwork waiting to be filed. The man's calm demeanor, which had moments ago been so infuriating, now seemed pathetic. The last gasp of a cornered suspect trying to bluff his way out of a sealed fate. Jensen even allowed himself a small, contemptuous smirk. He envisioned the write-up, a successful, proactive stop preventing a potential crime in a high-value area. It would look good on his record. He savored the moment, the feeling of absolute control, the clean, simple narrative he had constructed, in which he was the hero, and this man, this anomaly, was the villain. The distant rhythmic hum of city traffic was a comforting backdrop to his victory. The backup unit would be there in 3 minutes, maybe less. 3 more minutes of this charade, and then he could move on with his day. It was this profound miscalculation, this basking in a triumph that existed only in his prejudiced imagination, that gave Dr. Thorne the perfect, silent canvas upon which to paint Jensen's ruin. Just as Jensen was about to utter another command, perhaps to order Thorne to his knees, Dr. Thorne raised a single hand, palm forward. It was not a gesture of surrender, but a universal signal to pause. Stop. The movement was so economical and deliberate that it momentarily broke through Jensen's self-satisfied haze. "Officer Kyle Jensen," Dr. Thorne said, his voice cutting through the air with a new and unfamiliar resonance. It was no longer the neutral tone of a citizen. It was the precise, clipped cadence of command. "I am going to ask you to stand down, immediately." Jensen's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. He was done with this game. But before he could speak, Dr. Thorne made another slow, telegraphed movement. He reached, not for a wallet in a back pocket, but toward a small, almost invisible zippered compartment on the side of his athletic shorts. For a split second, Jensen's training screamed, his hand instinctively tightening on his holstered weapon. But the motion was too fluid, too non-threatening. From the tiny pocket, Dr. Thorne produced a thin, black leather credential case. He did not flash it.
He opened it with a quiet, practiced motion and held it out for Jensen to see, his arm steady as a rock. Time itself seemed to warp and slow down. The image presented to Officer Jensen, captured in perfect, damning clarity by his own body cam, was an impossibility that his mind fought to reject. Inside the case, behind a clear plastic window, was an official identification card. The photograph showed the same calm, unreadable face he was looking at now. The name read Dr. Marcus Thorne, but it was the words above the name that shattered Jensen's world. In bold, gold-embossed letters, they spelled out Federal Bureau of Investigation. To the right, set against a deep blue background, was the unmistakable, radiating seal of the United States Department of Justice. Below the ID, nestled in a custom-cut recess, was a heavy, gold-plated badge. its intricate eagle design catching the afternoon sun and reflecting it back as a blinding starburst. "My name is Special Agent Marcus Thorne, badge number 7 Alpha 154, Thorne stated, his voice now devoid of any pretense of civilian status. It was cold, factual, and utterly final. "You are actively interfering with a federally sanctioned counter-surveillance field exercise. You have committed multiple civil rights violations under color of law, and your conduct constitutes the unlawful detainment of a federal agent in the performance of his duties. Everything you have said and done has been recorded. The biometrics later extracted from the body cam footage would show the precise moment Jensen's cognitive functions overloaded. His heart rate, which had been a steady 110 beats per minute, skyrocketed to a frantic 155 in less than 2 seconds. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a pale, sickly gray. His jaw went slack, his mouth opening slightly as if to form a word that would not come. His eyes, wide with a dawning animal terror, darted from the gleaming badge to Thorne's impassive face and back again, unable to reconcile the two realities. The man in running shorts, the predator, the suspect, the constitutional scholar, was a ghost. In his place stood an agent of the FBI, a man whose authority dwarfed his own into non-existence. The handcuffs, still dangling from his right hand, suddenly felt impossibly heavy, no longer a symbol of his power, but a monument to his career-ending stupidity. He had not just made a mistake, he had arrested the very concept of law and order he claimed to represent. If you believe Officer Jensen's fate was sealed at this exact moment, hit the like button and subscribe to see the full, devastating consequences that followed. The sound that broke the spell was the distant, rising wail of a siren, the very backup Officer Jensen had so confidently summoned. It grew from a faint cry on the edge of hearing to an insistent, approaching shriek, a soundtrack for his rapidly collapsing reality. The 1st Chicago Police Department patrol car, Unit 72 Charlie, arrived with a short, sharp chirp of its siren, its tires crunching on the gravel service path 100 feet away. The body cam footage from the passenger side officer, a 5-year veteran named Michael Smith, captures the scene from a fresh, damning perspective. Time-stamped at 3:39 p.m., the video shows Smith and his partner, Officer Diaz, exiting their vehicle, their expressions a mix of routine readiness and professional caution. From their vantage point, the situation looked deceptively simple. Their colleague, Jensen, appeared to have a suspect under control. They saw Jensen standing stiffly, a pair of handcuffs dangling from his hand like a broken toy, his face a ghostly white. Opposite him stood a man in athletic wear, perfectly still, radiating a calm that was utterly incongruous with the scene. Smith keyed his own radio. "Dispatch 72 Charlie on scene. What's the update, Kyle?" Before Jensen could form a coherent reply, a second vehicle screamed into view, this one an unmarked black sedan that moved with an urgency that spoke of a different level of authority. It cut across a section of manicured lawn, a flagrant violation of park rules that signaled the irrelevance of such trivialities, and came to a hard stop just yards from the confrontation. The driver's door flew open, and a woman emerged, her movements sharp and purposeful. She wore a dark pantsuit, and the gold shield clipped to her belt identified her as a captain. Her eyes, however, were not on the uniformed officer in distress. They swept past Jensen as if she were a piece of scenery, locking immediately onto Dr. Thorne. The change in her demeanor was instantaneous and profound. "Agent Thorne?" she called out, her voice clear and carrying across the grass. "Captain Eva Rostova, Internal Affairs. We received your security protocol alert. Are you unharmed, sir?" The words hit Officer Smith and Diaz like a physical blow. Their body cams recorded their shared glance of pure, unadulterate shock. Agent Thorne, sir. The honorifics, the immediate recognition, the arrival of IAB before they even knew what was happening, it all painted a picture of a disaster far beyond a simple case, of a non-compliant civilian.
They looked from their captain, now standing at a respectable distance from the man in shorts, to their colleague.
Kyle Jensen was no longer a cop in control. He was the epicenter of a cataclysmic professional error, and they were now official witnesses to his career's final, agonizing moments. Dr. Marcus Thorne's response was as calm and procedural as if he were dictating a field report. "Captain Rostova, I am physically unharmed. However, your officer," he stated, gesturing slightly with his head toward the paralyzed Jensen, "has engaged in a pattern of escalating misconduct. It began with an unlawful detention predicated on what he explicitly termed a demographic mismatch, and it was about to conclude with an unlawful arrest for obstruction. I must insist that his body-worn camera be immediately secured as primary evidence." Captain Rostova's face, already grim, hardened into a mask of cold fury. She did not debate the facts or ask for clarification. She accepted Thorne's account as absolute truth. Her gaze finally shifted, landing on Kyle Jensen with the force of a physical impact. The official report would later describe her expression as one of profound professional contempt. The world for Jensen had shrunk to this single horrifying tableau. The distant sounds of the city, the rustle of the leaves, all of it faded into a dull roar in his ears. He was acutely aware of the park-goers who had now stopped to watch, their phones held up, their faces a gallery of curiosity and judgment. He could feel the weight of Smith's and Diaz's stares, no longer the gazes of brothers in arms, but of forensic observers at an autopsy. "Officer Jensen," Rostova's voice sliced through his paralysis, sharp and stripped of all courtesy. "Place your handcuffs on your belt. Now, you will surrender your service weapon, your badge, and your body-worn camera to Officer Smith." Her orders were delivered in the open air, a public and deliberate ritual of degradation. Jensen's hands trembled violently as he fumbled with the snaps on his duty belt. Each action felt slow, surreal, as if he were moving through water. He unholstered his pistol with two shaking hands and handed it, grip first, to Smith, who took it with the detached air of a morgue attendant handling a personal effect. The body cam was unclipped and carefully placed into a pre-labeled evidence bag by Diaz. "You are relieved of all law enforcement duties effective immediately," Rostova continued, her voice relentless. "You will be escorted to the 18th District. You will not speak to anyone. You will await a formal interview. Do you understand?" Jensen could only manage a choked, silent nod, the last vestige of his authority stripped from him in front of his peers and the public. As Diaz placed a hand on his elbow to lead him away, a man utterly defeated, Rostova turned back to the federal agent. "Agent Thorne, the city attorney's office has been notified and is already en route. They will need a preliminary statement to begin calculating the damages." The financial annihilation was just beginning. The aftermath for Kyle Jensen was not a single dramatic explosion, but a slow, methodical, and meticulously documented demolition of a life. The ride to the 18th District was a silent ordeal, with Officer Diaz driving and Officer Smith sitting in the passenger seat, the two men pointedly refusing to make eye contact or speak to their disgraced colleague. For Jensen, the world had become a muffled, disorienting blur. At the station, he was not treated as a fellow officer, but as a liability, an administrative problem to be processed with cold, impersonal efficiency. He was led not to the familiar locker room, but to a small, windowless interrogation room typically reserved for internal affairs matters. The subsequent hours were a masterclass in bureaucratic annihilation. The formal IAB interview was not a conversation, it was a dissection. Captain Rostova and two stone-faced investigators sat opposite him, a large monitor positioned between them. They played his own body cam footage from start to finish, the audio of his own voice, thick with unearned arrogance and baseless accusations, filling the sterile room. They paused the video at key moments. They paused it when he baselessly claimed people were uncomfortable. They paused it when he sneered about a constitutional scholar in running shorts.
They paused it on the tight close-up of Special Agent Thorne's federal credentials. Each time, they asked the same calm, devastating question. Officer Jensen, can you articulate the specific, non-prejudicial, and observable criminal behavior that justified this action, as required by Departmental Policy 412.3 and the legal precedent set by Terry v. Ohio? He had no answer. His justifications, which had seemed so solid and righteous in the park, now sounded like the desperate ramblings of a fool. His gut feeling, his instinct, his 12 years of experience, all of it evaporated under the cold, unblinking eye of the camera he himself had worn. The termination was a formality, delivered 2 days later via a terse official letter. He was fired for cause, citing gross misconduct, violations of the Civil Rights Code, and conduct unbecoming of an officer. This single act triggered the first and most catastrophic domino. His annual salary of $105,000 vanished. Far more devastating was the clause in his contract regarding termination for cause, the complete and immediate forfeiture of his vested pension. The aftermath for Kyle Jensen was not a single dramatic explosion, but a slow, methodical, and meticulously documented demolition of a life. The ride to the 18th District was a silent ordeal, with Officer Diaz driving and Officer Smith sitting in the passenger seat, the two men pointedly refusing to make eye contact or speak to their disgraced colleague. For Jensen, the world had become a muffled, disorienting blur. At the station, he was not treated as a fellow officer, but as a liability, an administrative problem to be processed with cold, impersonal efficiency. He was led not to the familiar locker room, but to a small, windowless interrogation room typically reserved for internal affairs matters. The subsequent hours were a masterclass in bureaucratic annihilation. The formal IAB interview was not a conversation, it was a dissection. Captain Rostova and two stone-faced investigators sat opposite him, a large monitor positioned between them. They played his own body cam footage from start to finish, the audio of his own voice, thick with unearned arrogance and baseless accusations, filling the sterile room. They paused the video at key moments. They paused it when he baselessly claimed people were uncomfortable. They paused it when he sneered about a constitutional scholar in running shorts. They paused it on the tight close-up of Special Agent Thorne's federal credentials. Each time, they asked the same calm, devastating question. Officer Jensen, can you articulate the specific, non-prejudicial, and observable criminal behavior that justified this action, as required by Departmental Policy 412.3 and the legal precedent set by Terry v. Ohio? He had no answer. His justifications, which had seemed so solid and righteous in the park, now sounded like the desperate ramblings of a fool. His gut feeling, his instinct, his 12 years of experience, all of it evaporated under the cold, unblinking eye of the camera he himself had worn. The termination was a formality, delivered 2 days later via a terse official letter. He was fired for cause, citing gross misconduct, violations of the Civil Rights Code, and conduct unbecoming of an officer. This single act triggered the first and most catastrophic domino. His annual salary of $105,000 vanished. Far more devastating was the clause in his contract regarding termination for cause, the complete and immediate forfeiture of his vested pension.
Actuarial tables, cited in the subsequent civil proceedings, calculated the projected lifetime value of that pension at a staggering $2,550,000. It was money he had considered his own, a reward for his years of service. And it was gone, erased by 7 minutes of prejudice. The civil lawsuit filed by the Department of Justice on behalf of Agent Thorne was a swift and brutal affair. Faced with irrefutable video evidence, the city of Chicago's attorneys knew a jury trial would be an expensive public humiliation. They opted to settle. The final figure agreed upon was $850,000 for damages related to civil rights violations and unlawful detainment. Added to this were the city's legal and procedural costs amounting to $225,800. The total bill for Kyle Jensen's mistake came to $1,075,800. But the city was not content to simply absorb the cost of his gross negligence. A recourse action was immediately filed against him, a legal mechanism allowing the municipality to recover damages from an employee whose actions were found to be willful and outside the scope of their professional duties. Kyle Jensen, the man who once wielded the authority of the city, was now its debtor, legally bound to repay over $1 million. His home was sold, his savings were wiped out. A court order garnished any future wages he might earn, ensuring he would carry this debt for the remainder of his life. The sum of his lost pension and his direct liability created a personal financial crater of $3,625,800. Professionally, he was a pariah. His name was added to the Brady List, a national database of law enforcement officers whose credibility has been compromised, making him unemployable in any security or legal field. Former colleagues who once shared jokes and coffee with him now looked away when they saw him in public. His name became a verb at the academy, a cautionary tale for new recruits about the consequences of letting bias override procedure. "Don't pull a Jensen," the instructors would say. Meanwhile, 3 weeks after the incident, Special Agent Marcus Thorne stood in a different park, on a different assignment, his focus as sharp and unwavering as ever. The incident was, for him, a closed file, a professional problem that had been identified and neutralized with clinical precision. His world continued, his competence reaffirmed, his service uninterrupted. Kyle Jensen's world had ended. Did he finally learn that authority is a responsibility, not a weapon? Did he understand that in an era of total documentation, prejudice always comes with a price tag, itemized down to the last cent? The official record offers no insight into his remorse, only a cold, hard accounting of his ruin. If this story of documented justice resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to see it. And tell us in the comments, have you ever seen a case where the consequences were so perfectly and publicly deserved?